You won't want to miss this. Before we jump in, hit subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. The neon haze of Neovira pulsed overhead, casting shifting colors across the rain-slicked streets. The city was alive, humming with static, the roar of hovertrams overhead, and the rhythmic flicker of countless holograms advertising things no one could afford. From the glass towers of the corporate elite to the steel catwalks of the slums below, everything here was built on a foundation of control. And Elias Voss had spent his entire life slipping through the cracks. He pulled up to the entrance of his high-rise tenement, killing the engine of his hoverbike with a flick of his wrist. The bike hissed as its energy core cooled, the glowing blue stabilizers flickering out. Elias dismounted, adjusting the strap of the pulse pistol holstered at his side. His coat was damp from the mist that constantly hung in the air. Another night, another job complete. Just another nameless courier in the underbelly of a city built on secrets. But as he approached his apartment, his pulse quickened. The security panel on his door blinked green. He stopped in his tracks. It should have been red, locked, encrypted, unbreachable. His brow furrowed. No one had access to his place. No one should have been able to get past his defenses, especially not in a city where people vanished for far less. His fingers instinctively brushed the kinetic edge blade strapped to his belt. A flick of his wrist and it would be humming, a monomolecular edge capable of slicing through even military-grade armor. He exhaled slowly, his instincts telling him to walk away. But something held him there. He reached out, tapping the control panel. The door slid open with a whisper. Silence greeted him. His apartment was dark, too dark. Elias stepped inside, his boots making no sound against the metal flooring. He kept his stance loose, ready to react. His cybernetic implant adjusted his vision, enhancing the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the blinds. And then he saw her. She was sitting on his kitchen counter, one leg crossed over the other, watching him with cold silver eyes that didn't blink. Elias' breath slowed. Her skin was black, but not just black. It had a shifting, liquid quality to it, like circuitry running just beneath the surface. When the light hit it, faint blue patterns pulsed beneath the surface, moving in ways that weren't quite natural. Not human. His grip on the blade tightened. You've got 5 seconds to explain before I carve you out of my house. The woman tilted her head slightly, smirking. That's cute. Her voice was a melodic hum, layered with synthetic undertones, as if it were running through multiple audio channels at once. Elias took a slow step forward. I don't do cute. I do answers. She remained still, as if she weren't concerned in the slightest about the armed man standing in front of her. Then, with fluid, deliberate movement, she slid off the countertop, her bare feet whispering against the floor. She was tall, almost his height, but moved like she weighed nothing. You don't need that, she murmured, glancing at the weapon in his grip. Elias exhaled through his nose. Lady, you broke into my house. You don't get to decide what I need. Something flickered across her face, amusement, maybe, but it was gone too fast to read. I'm not here to hurt you, she said, taking a step closer. Elias didn't move. His instincts screamed that she was dangerous, but something else was buried underneath that danger. Something different. His eyes flickered to her bodysuit, a sleek, form-fitting construct of dark nanoweave, standard for high-tier infiltration units. But what really caught his attention was the subtle glow of embedded circuitry running along her forearms. That wasn't standard. Elias narrowed his eyes. You're augmented. Her silver gaze met his, unblinking. Not exactly. That wasn't an answer. His muscles tensed. If she was a fully synthetic android, that was one thing. If she was something in between, a hybrid, an unregistered experimental entity, then she was something far, far more dangerous. What are you? Elias demanded. She hesitated, and in that moment, the entire atmosphere shifted. Before she could answer, a sound cut through the quiet, a distant mechanical whir, faint but growing. Elias barely had time to react before a red targeting laser swept across his chest. Glass exploded inward as a drone crashed through the window. The sleek, black hunting machine moved with lethal precision, scanning the room with a cold, inhuman intelligence. Its targeting reticle locked onto Cirrus, because of course that was her name, of course she had a name. She moved first. Fast. Too fast. Before Elias could process it, she grabbed his wrist and yanked him down just as a pulse round sizzled through the air where his head had been. The shot tore through his kitchen wall, sending data chips and shards of ceramic scattering. The drone adjusted, recalibrating for a second shot. Cirrus wasn't waiting. She lunged, her arm snapping forward. A thin metallic wire shot from her wrist, embedding into the drone's mainframe. The air crackled as she overloaded its systems in a single, brutal surge. The drone convulsed, sparks bursting from its frame, and then, boom. The explosion sent them both crashing backward. Elias hit the floor hard, his ears ringing from the blast. His vision swam as he struggled to push himself up. Cirrus was already standing. Her silver eyes flickered, her expression unreadable. "They found me," she murmured. Elias let out a sharp breath, gripping the edge of the counter to steady himself. "Who the hell is they?" Cirrus didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his pulse pistol from the counter, tossing it to him. "You want answers," she said, voice low. "Then you're coming with me." Elias caught the gun, his grip firm. He should have walked away, should have told her to deal with her own problems. But he had seen the look in her eyes. Not fear. Not desperation. Determination. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't just about survival. It was bigger than that. And Elias Voss had spent his life avoiding causes. But this time, he was curious. "Fine," he muttered, checking the power cell on his pistol. "Let's move." They slipped into the night, disappearing into the neon-lit labyrinth of Neovira. A courier and a woman who wasn't human, running from something neither of them fully understood. And Elias had a feeling that by the time he did understand it, it would already be too late. The neon jungle of Neovira blurred past them as Elias and Cirrus ran. They moved through the rain-slicked alleyways of District 44, weaving through the metal catwalks and abandoned market stalls that lined the lower levels of the city. The air smelled of burning coolant and damp steel, the ever-present hum of distant engines vibrating through the walls. Elias wasn't new to running. He had spent years dodging corporate enforcers, crime syndicates, and bounty hunters who didn't know the meaning of quit. But this was different. The woman sprinting beside him, if she even was a woman, moved like a shadow, effortlessly adjusting her speed, weaving through obstacles with unnatural precision. She was faster than any normal human should have been. And right now, Elias didn't have time to question how. A high-pitched whine cut through the air, and his instincts screamed. "Down!" he barked. Cirrus dropped just as a plasma round scorched the space where her head had been. The shot struck a rusted cargo crate instead, sending sparks and molten metal spraying in all directions. Elias turned sharply, eyes snapping to the rooftops above them. 3 black-clad enforcers stood along the steel beams, their glowing red visors sweeping the alley. They were armed with high-powered pulse rifles, military-grade tech, not standard corporate security. Whoever Cirrus had pissed off, they were throwing serious firepower after her. "Keep moving," Elias growled. "I'll handle them." Before Cirrus could argue, he dropped to one knee, pulled his pulse pistol, and fired 2 rapid shots. The first round struck one of the enforcers in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. The second shot grazed another's helmet, causing his visor to flicker violently. But the third one was already moving. Elias barely had time to react before the enforcer leaped down from the rooftop, landing with a force that sent cracks through the pavement. The bastard was augmented, his cybernetic arms gleaming under the flickering streetlights. The enforcer moved fast, too fast. Elias twisted just in time to avoid the first punch, but the second hit him square in the ribs. Pain exploded through his side as he staggered back, breath stolen from his lungs. "Voss," Cirrus started. "I've got him," Elias gritted out. The enforcer lunged again, but this time, Elias was ready. He ducked under the swing, using the momentum to drive his kinetic edge blade into the enforcer's side. The blade hummed as it met resistance, cybernetic plating beneath the skin. But the force was enough to send the enforcer staggering. Elias took the opening, gripping the man's arm and using his own weight to flip him over his shoulder. The enforcer slammed into the ground, metal plating cracking against pavement. Elias fired a point-blank pulse round into his chest. The enforcer twitched, then went still. Elias exhaled sharply. One down. Above them, the remaining two enforcers were still repositioning, their weapons locked on. Cirrus was already moving. She ran up the side of a cargo container, using the momentum to launch herself into the air. Before the enforcers could react, she extended both arms, and two thin metallic wires shot from her wrists, embedding into their visors. The enforcers convulsed as a surge of raw energy flooded their neural systems. Their bodies jerked violently before their armor lights dimmed and their visors cracked from the inside. They collapsed. Cirrus landed smoothly, retracting the wires like it was nothing. Her breathing was steady, unshaken. Elias stared. That was terrifyingly efficient. She smirked. Would you rather I let them shoot you? No complaints. He exhaled, rubbing his ribs where he'd been hit. But I still have no idea what the hell I just saw. Cirrus glanced at the bodies. We need to keep moving. If they tracked me here, more are coming. Elias wasn't sure why, but something about the way she said it made his stomach twist. Right, he muttered, holstering his weapon. Where the hell are we going? Cirrus hesitated, just for a second. Then she turned toward the elevated tram lines in the distance, their glowing rails cutting through the skyline like veins of energy. We need to get underground. The descent into the underworld. The tram was their best bet. The upper levels of Neovira were corporate-controlled, heavily monitored, and crawling with enforcers. But beneath it, beneath the towering skyscrapers and luxury districts was the Underhaven, a place where surveillance didn't reach, where the city's forgotten population survived. If you wanted to disappear in Neovira, you went underground. Elias and Cirrus sprinted across the loading docks, weaving through the maze of shipping containers. The air smelled of rust and ozone, the hum of the transit systems vibrating beneath their feet. The tram station loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of metal and neon, its hovering railcars speeding past at blistering speeds. A departure announcement echoed overhead. Inbound transit to District 8. Final boarding in 1 minute. Cirrus picked up speed. That's our ride. They reached the tram terminal just as the final call rang out. A few late-night passengers loitered near the entrance. Factory workers, couriers, a handful of masked figures who were probably mercs. No one paid them much attention. But Elias felt it. Something was wrong. His eyes scanned the crowd, and that's when he saw them. 3 figures, dressed in hooded cloaks, hands tucked into their long coats. They weren't just passengers. They were watching. Waiting. Cirrus saw them too. Her voice dropped. They were expecting us. Elias' grip tightened around his weapon. And then, before he could react, one of the cloaked figures reached inside their coat. A blade. Sleek. Black. Curved. Everything happened at once. The assassin lunged at Cirrus. She twisted, catching his wrist mid-strike, flipping him over her shoulder. The moment he hit the ground, she snapped his arm at the joint, causing a sickening crack. The second assassin was faster. He drew a pulse pistol, aiming straight at Elias. Elias moved on instinct. Before the shot could fire, he grabbed a discarded metal pipe from the ground and hurled it at the gunman's hand. The impact sent the weapon flying, but the assassin didn't hesitate. Instead, he lunged, grappling Elias with surprising strength. Elias twisted, breaking free just enough to drive his elbow into the assassin's ribs. The man stumbled, but not for long. He came back hard, swinging a knife in a brutal arc. Elias barely dodged, feeling the blade skim past his jacket. Then, bang. A single gunshot. The assassin's body jerked violently before collapsing to the ground. Elias turned. Cirrus stood there, holding the stolen pulse pistol, smoke curling from the barrel. He exhaled. Remind me never to piss you off. She arched a brow. Smart man. The tram doors slid open. Cirrus grabbed his wrist. "We need to go. Now." Elias didn't argue. They stepped onto the train, the doors hissing shut behind them. The tram lurched forward, speeding into the depths of Neovira's underworld. Elias leaned back against the wall, heart still racing. He glanced at Cirrus. "You want to tell me what the hell I just got myself into?" She met his gaze. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." The tram hurtled through the underground tunnels, a steel bullet racing through the veins of Neovira's underbelly. Inside, Elias leaned against the cool metal wall of the train car, his pulse still thrumming from the fight at the station. The cabin was mostly empty, except for a few scattered passengers. People who had learned not to stare too long or ask questions in a city where curiosity got you killed. Cirrus sat across from him, arms crossed, staring at the glowing advertisements flickering along the interior walls. Her silver eyes reflected the shifting light, unreadable as ever. Elias exhaled slowly. "You want to tell me what the hell I just got myself into?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her head slightly, studying him the way a scientist might study a test subject. Finally, she murmured, "Neovira isn't what you think it is." Elias scoffed. "Yeah, no shit. It's a corporate nightmare." She shook her head. "No, it's worse." Something in her tone made his stomach tighten. Cirrus leaned forward, rolling up the sleeve of her bodysuit. At first, Elias didn't see anything. Then, a faint blue glow pulsed beneath her skin. Elias frowned. "What am I looking at?" She tilted her wrist slightly, and the light shifted, forming a sequence of symbols that seemed to move beneath her flesh. Then, suddenly, a holographic interface flickered to life, projecting a massive blueprint into the air. Elias' breath caught. The schematic was a map of Neovira, but not just the city as he knew it. It showed something hidden beneath the surface. A vast, classified structure buried deep below the skyline, marked with red danger zones and restricted access codes. At the center of it all, a single ominous word blinked in bold text. "Extermination Protocol, pending activation." Elias' blood ran cold. "What the hell am I looking at?" Cirrus met his gaze. "A kill switch." He stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. She continued, her voice low. "Neovira isn't just a city. It's an experiment. The Prime Authority built it as a controlled population zone, a test for the next phase of planetary colonization. Every citizen implanted with a biometric chip, every system linked to a centralized network." She tapped her forearm. "It's all connected to this." Elias' jaw clenched. "You're telling me every single person in this city has a built-in self-destruct switch?" Cirrus nodded. "If the population ever becomes unmanageable, if crime levels rise too high, if dissent spreads too far, the system wipes them out. All of them." Elias shook his head. "That's insane." Her gaze didn't waver. "It's reality." Elias dragged a hand down his face. He had always known Neovira was a city built on control. But this was genocide. His mind raced. How many people lived here? 5 million? 10? And the corporations running the show could erase them all with a single command? Cirrus studied him carefully. "Now you understand why they want me back." Elias narrowed his eyes. "What are you, some kind of rogue asset?" She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. Then she rolled her sleeve back down. "I was created for them," she admitted. "A prototype hybrid. Part biological, part synthetic." Elias tensed. "You're telling me they built you?" Cirrus exhaled. "Not built. Engineered. They wanted something adaptable. Something with the processing power of an AI but the independence of a human mind. A perfect tool. A perfect weapon." She turned her hand over, staring at her own palm like it belonged to someone else. "I was their key to controlling the failsafe. I was designed to interface with it, to activate it if necessary." Elias' throat tightened. "But you didn't." Cirrus met his gaze. "No." A heavy silence stretched between them. Elias leaned back, exhaling slowly. So, let me get this straight. You were supposed to be their ultimate kill switch, but you went rogue. And now they want you dead before you can tell the world what they're planning. Cirrus gave a small, humorless smile. Something like that. Elias stared at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he muttered, "Well, shit." The tram jolted as it descended into the lowest levels of the city. The neon lights above them flickered, replaced by the dim, flickering glow of old emergency lamps. The walls outside the tram were corroded metal, covered in decades of graffiti and rust. This was the Underhaven, the lowest sector of Neovira, a place where even the Prime Authority had lost control. Cirrus stood. "We get off here." Elias pushed himself up. "What's down here?" "People who know things," she said cryptically. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. The air smelled of damp steel, oil, and something faintly burnt. The Underhaven wasn't like the rest of the city. It was colder, darker, a labyrinth of forgotten tunnels and abandoned infrastructure. Elias adjusted the collar of his coat, his instincts prickling. "You sure we're not walking into another death trap?" Cirrus smirked. "No." Elias sighed. "Fantastic." They moved through the winding alleyways, past flickering neon signs written in languages Elias didn't recognize. The streets were lined with makeshift market stalls, dealers selling stolen tech, cybernetic implants, black market weapon mods. Cirrus led him deeper, finally stopping in front of an unmarked steel door tucked between two industrial buildings. She knocked 3 times. A voice crackled through an old intercom. "This better be important." Cirrus glanced at Elias. "Don't do anything stupid." Before he could reply, the door unlocked with a heavy clang. They stepped inside. The room beyond was a hidden data den, illuminated by dozens of flickering holoscreens displaying endless streams of hacked surveillance footage, system readouts, and security breaches. The air was thick with the scent of old wiring and ozone. At the center of it all sat a man plugged directly into the network, cables trailing from his spinal implants into the machinery around him. His cybernetic eyes glowed faintly as he turned toward them. "Cirrus, you reckless bastard, you should be dead." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Charming." The man ignored him, focusing on Cirrus. "You're insane for coming here." She crossed her arms. "I need information." The man sighed. "Of course you do." His glowing gaze shifted to Elias. "And who's this?" Cirrus smirked. "The only idiot dumb enough to help me." Elias exhaled sharply. "Great. Love this plan already." The hacker shook his head. "You don't get it, do you?" He tapped a few keys on his interface, and a massive data file appeared on the main screen. Elias' stomach dropped. It was a classified Prime Authority report. A list of names. People marked for system-wide termination. At the very top, Elias Voss. The hacker turned to him. "Congratulations, courier. You just made the kill list." Elias clenched his jaw. "Well, shit." Cirrus exhaled. "Welcome to the real fight." The weight of his name on that kill list settled deep in Elias' chest. He had spent years keeping his head down, making sure no one knew his name unless he wanted them to. He ran jobs, delivered secrets, traded in whispers, and yet here he was, top of the list, marked for death by the most powerful force in Neovira. Cirrus stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the data with cold calculation. The hacker, who still hadn't bothered introducing himself, leaned back in his chair, the cables running from his spine humming softly as his implants processed the incoming stream of data. Elias exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. "So," he muttered, "I'm guessing lay low and hope they forget about me isn't an option." The hacker barked out a dry laugh. "Nope. You're burnt. Your ID, your bio-SIG, your whole profile. It's already been pushed to every enforcer, every corporate bounty board, and every freelancer looking for a payday. The only reason they haven't already found you is because you're in my den." Elias glanced at Cirrus. "You're really making my week better. You know that." She smirked. "You wanted answers. Now you have them." The hacker cut in. And you don't have much time. The Prime Authority is accelerating its timeline. He gestured to the screen, pulling up a new file. The extermination protocol. It's not just a failsafe anymore. It's scheduled for activation in less than 24 hours. Elias' stomach tightened. You're telling me the whole city is about to be wiped? The hacker nodded grimly. Every implanted citizen. The whole population is already flagged for termination. They're going to reset Neovira, burn it all down, and start fresh with a new batch of acceptable residents. Elias looked at Cirrus, his voice quiet but sharp. And I'm assuming you already knew this. She held his gaze. I knew it was coming. I didn't know it was happening this fast. Elias let out a slow, measured breath. Right. And I suppose you have some brilliant, well-thought-out plan to stop it. The hacker and Cirrus exchanged a look. Elias groaned. Of course you don't. Cirrus finally spoke. The Prime Authority controls everything from their central hub, the core district's mainframe. If we can reach it, I can override the system. The hacker snorted. You make it sound easy. Elias crossed his arms. And what's stopping us from waltzing in and doing exactly that? The hacker leaned forward. For one, the core district is the most fortified sector in the city. It's crawling with enforcers, automated security, high-end kill drones, and a whole lot of nasty shit designed to turn anyone unauthorized into vapor. You don't just walk into the core. Elias nodded. All right. Sounds impossible. What's option B? Cirrus looked him dead in the eye. There is no option B. Elias exhaled sharply. Perfect. The hacker tapped a few keys, pulling up a security blueprint of the core district. If you're insane enough to try this, you'll need to hit the primary control tower. It's where the neural mainframe is housed, the system that transmits the kill signal to every implanted citizen. That's the only place you can override the protocol. Cirrus nodded. Then that's where we go. The hacker shook his head, muttering under his breath, unbelievable. Elias rolled his shoulders. All right, then. Let's go break into the most secure building in the city. They left the den behind, moving through the dark corridors of the Underhaven, past silent figures who barely spared them a glance. News traveled fast here. Everyone could sense that something was coming. By the time they reached the upper levels of the city, the streets were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Elias noticed it first, the absence of usual street traffic, the flickering signs displaying system alert. Restricted zone active in glowing red letters. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of engines. Cirrus tensed. They know we're coming. Elias sighed. Of course they do. The first wave of enforcers appeared, a squad of 10, moving in synchronized formation, weapons raised. Behind them, a black hovercraft hovered just above the ground, its side hatch sliding open to reveal more troops inside. Elias barely had time to process it before the first pulse rounds were fired. He dove behind a rusted vehicle chassis, cursing under his breath as the air burned with energy discharges. Cirrus was already moving. She vaulted over the barricade, her body twisting midair as she extended her wrist-mounted wires. They latched onto the closest enforcer, sending a violent surge through his body. He dropped instantly. Elias popped up from cover and fired 3 quick shots, hitting 2 enforcers center mass, sending them sprawling onto the pavement. More enforcers poured in. Cirrus moved like a storm, fast, lethal, precise. She weaved between enemies, disarming them, breaking them, taking them down before they could react. Elias fought beside her, using cover, taking measured shots, keeping them from getting surrounded. Then the hovercraft fired. A pulse grenade launched from the side hatch, landing just a few meters from them. Cirrus grabbed Elias by the arm and yanked him backward just as it detonated. The shockwave sent them sprawling, metal debris raining down around them. Elias coughed, pushing himself up. All right. That sucked. Cirrus pulled him to his feet. We need to move. They cut through a side alley, weaving through the labyrinth of abandoned market stalls, trying to put distance between themselves and the enforcers. The core district loomed ahead. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. Almost there. A deafening roar filled the air. Elias turned just in time to see a massive aerial drone descend from the rooftops, its six-legged frame bristling with weapons. It locked onto them with a high-pitched whine. And fired. Cirrus tackled Elias just as a railgun round shredded through the ground where he had been standing. Elias scrambled upright, breathing hard. I hate this city. Cirrus snapped, run now, complain later. They sprinted for the control tower. The moment they reached the entrance, Cirrus hacked into the access panel, her fingers moving in a blur. The doors slid open. Inside, the tower was a cathedral of data, massive glowing servers stretching toward the ceiling, the air thick with electrical hum. At the far end of the room stood the central mainframe, a pulsing core of blue light. Cirrus ran to the terminal, jacking into the system. Outside, the drone loomed closer, its weapon systems recalibrating. Elias fired at it, trying to buy her time. Cirrus' hands flew across the interface. Almost there, almost. The tower trembled as the drone unleashed a railgun shot. Cirrus gasped as the energy pulse surged through her body, her circuits flickering dangerously. Elias caught her before she collapsed. Hey, stay with me. Her fingers twitched. I'm fine. Just stall them. Elias turned, unloading every round he had at the drone. Then, a final keystroke. The air shifted. Cirrus exhaled. It's done. The extermination protocol was erased. Across the city, millions of citizens unknowingly had their lives saved. Elias exhaled, heart still hammering. That's it. Cirrus gave a tired smile. That's it. The drone powered down. The enforcers withdrew. Neovira belonged to its people again. Cirrus turned to Elias. You saved them. He smirked. You're the one who pushed the button. She held his gaze. Yeah, but you're the one who stayed. Elias exhaled. Guess I did. And for the first time in years, he didn't regret it.